Hi, I'm Brad, and I need to stop delaying this video. It's been a month. A lot of the systems that I've data mined in the past and was able to even activate with some string tweaks, Valve was like, yeah, we're gonna stop letting you do that now, which sucks. That being said, it doesn't matter if I can't activate them. They're still in there. They're just like hidden behind a wall that we just can't break. So I do want to talk about the features that didn't actually make it in SteamVR 2.0, but more of this video is actually talking about the actual SteamVR 2.0 release, even though it's been very buggy for a good amount of people. But yeah, I want to talk about it because I think SteamVR 2.0 really shows what Valve is up to in terms of what they see VR and really XR as a platform, and kind of compare it to this sort of enigma and collaboration that you're going to see from the entire industry in general, because there's a huge focus here on something that some people might not understand until they get that hardware that makes them understand. So on the day that they brought the SteamVR 2.0 beta and shipped it to the mass public users, they said, in this release, we're bringing all of what's new and exciting on the Steam platform into VR. This is our first step in a larger ongoing effort to better unify the Steam ecosystem for all users, providing a more consistent experience across devices. This update also allows us to add new Steam features in the future much faster and more frequently. And this consistent experience with faster updates, basically with the Steam client, it's totally true. In fact, leading up until this big update, all of our data miners have kind of noticed that Steam VR has been changing from this like very heavily reliant on the client to heavily reliant on the actual Steam itself, which is very different. Usually when you would download or get UI updates, most of them actually came from updating Steam VR, whereas now Valve can push updates to the actual Steam client itself or any of the big picture stuff. A lot of that UI changes will be able to quickly make its way to Steam VR because they don't have to actually get a team of people to say, hey, let's get into Steam VR code base, let's update the things to actually match everything. It's a lot more unified and actually makes more sense for a company of Valve's size, which is very small compared to the likes of like Apple or Meta, for example. Now, it's no secret that SteamVR 2.0, the big thing is like the UI changes, right? Huge focus on completely changing everything. And it's pretty wild because even though there's not a new hardware out yet or announced from them, this change is bigger than any SteamVR thing that they've ever done in the past. Like even when the Index launched, which was a big moment for them, releasing their own first-party VR hardware to do everything, the actual changes to UI and the actual Steam VR client itself were fairly minimal for the most part. So it's pretty wild to see this completely huge revitalization with all the new features and everything and all unified under this completely new design code without new hardware yet. Now, the first thing other than the UI, which, you can watch all these videos and clips of what it looks like, or you can just, head into SteamVR yourself if you can. There's a big focus on something that is very different from previous versions. And I really want to talk a lot about that because this is kind of the unification of the ecosystem battles that I think we're going to see in the next couple of years, even within this next year. So most versions of SteamVR up until this point, especially the last few years, when you would go to what was called the library, it would only show VR games or overlays. Whereas now with the new UI, while they do still have a VR category that it launches into, the UI doesn't only focus on VR games. In fact, there's a huge focus on your entire Steam experience, and that includes 2D games. Me and my data mining team for a while doing all this leading up to 2.0, had this suspicion and belief that Valve is not only focusing on the VR immersive content, but they're trying to do some interesting stuff with their huge library of 2D games that most people play on the platform. In fact, like Steam VR, people with even VR headsets plugged into Steam VR or Steam is like 2% of users, which is a very low number. And I'm guaranteed not many of those people are even using those devices monthly. And if you ever talk to people who have, developed games and launched games, VR games on Steam VR, the amount of money you can make on Steam platform for VR games is much lower than some of the other platforms you have. There's only like a handful of titles on Steam VR that get the same retention from the actual user base that actually use their VR headsets. And those are things such as like VR Chat, Half-Life Alyx, and those are the two big ones, I'd say. So Valve kind of put themselves in this chicken and egg problem where developers are not that interested in releasing some quality titles on the platform, and users are not even interested in checking out some of the newer titles, VR titles that come out on the platform that do come out for whatever reason, because they just have one title that they gravitate to, and that's all they need. So I think what they've learned with Steam Deck is people are willing to take the entire library of Steam, those 2D games I keep talking about, and as long as you approach them in a novel way, you get a lot of interest in hardware and adoption of things that Valve couldn't really get working before. So there's this huge focus from Valve in terms of features of getting 2D games playable on upcoming or current hardware in a somewhat enjoyable way. And I think this is the trend you're going to see from the overall market in general. You're going to have Apple coming out next year, and their big thing is, okay, well, we have our own developed first-party apps, but we have this entire library of iOS apps that are iPad or iPhone available that you can load onto the Apple Vision Pro and be able to have these 2D apps in your actual AR, VR space, depending on whatever you want to see. Apple also takes a step further by saying we're going to have real-time lighting and you can do some other cool stuff, some interesting interactions with it, resize it, make it as big as you want. A lot of focus on that until people kind of figure out how to develop immersive apps for this XR boom that's attempting to happen soon. And you're most likely going to see the same sort of strategy come out when Google and Samsung's partnership, which is happening right now. Samsung is making a new XR hardware to compete with Apple Vision Pro, and Google is pretty much making the software platform for it. You're probably going to see that same similar idea where they release a device and have the entire Google Play Store of Android flat apps to be able to run in your spatial environments as well. So you have these competing ecosystems that realize they have all this software that they can just take advantage of as with some tweaks and kind of show it in a novel way and more interesting, while also taking it mobile depending on how standalone some of these headsets are. And I think Valve is doing the same exact thing. They have a whole ecosystem of flat apps. It's primarily games at this point. They have a huge library of games. It's obviously very successful for them. So to be able to like advertise a VR headset by saying, hey, this is our ecosystem, all of our hardware is getting similar to our competitors, which I think is happening. You're seeing a huge unification of very similar ideas and hardware concepts on the market from the big players. It's all about ecosystem and what gets people want to buy that sort of hardware. And I'm not just talking about the fact that you can open 2D games in your SteamVR library pretty easily now because of 2.0. There's a lot of stuff related to a theater mode that Valve has been working on for a while. Now, we can't access it as of 2.0, but we've been able to access it for a while before. Basically, it relies on the SteamVR overlay system. You would open or launch a 2D app or game or whatever, and it would have a special button called theater mode. And what's interesting about the theater mode is it had a lot of references to real-time reflections, which has made me very excited. I've never been able to get that actually working, but it's a thing that's just been in the software hiding and is still hiding for whatever happens. And that's kind of the other big focus, I think, of SteamVR 2.0 that people are not gravitating to or realizing how big of a deal it is. So overlays have been kind of a big superpower of SteamVR for a while. They've just been incredibly untapped, whether it be due to lack of interest for users or developers, but also the UI of previous SteamVR whatever made overlays kind of hidden and awful. Whereas now they have this entire bottom bar that you can create overlays on the flies with your virtual desktop. So actually they're not virtual yet. They still rely on your actual desktop you have plugged into your PC. But I imagine the goal, especially with the references to GameScope overlays, which is the same compositor they use for the Steam Deck, is you'll be able to create actual windows on the fly as overlays, whether it be desktops or games or whatever, and don't have to rely on recordings, like kind of back-end recording software that's built into Windows or whatever. Big focus on adding windows, any overlay goes in that bottom bar. And they even made it to the point where if you have a ton of overlays open, you'll be able to swipe around that bottom bar to actually see all the different things you've opened. So they expect people to really go balls deep when it comes to overlays, to the point where you might fill up your entire bar, which works now, works great. I like SteamVR overlays. I think they're very valuable because they don't only work for 2D applications, but they can also work for 3D applications. Like, for example, Vermilion, which is a wonderful painting canvas app where you can actually have a 3D overlay version of Vermilion on top of any other application you want. So you can have all your 2D window applications up here and then paint on a 3D canvas in your virtual space. And of course, the other big benefit of SteamVR overlays that I always like about it is it's actually persistent across AR and VR. So you can be in something like VR chat and do all your overlays, of course, on VR chat. But if you click the room view button, that will switch you to your pass-through view, right, on Lighthouse-enabled headsets. Now, I didn't use a Lighthouse-enabled headsets for this video because the only really good pass-through experience you can get with that right now on a one-click solution is the Valve Index. And the Valve Index pass-through is not good. It's very old and bad and very exposure-dependent, like all pass-through headsets. But it's very simple, and you can just have that persistence of apps across your AR and VR space at any time. There's also been references to a Steam Link overlay application being built for SteamVR as well. And I think the main idea for this is if you have a Steam Deck and you want to use your Steam Deck and stream it to a headset or something, they'll have an actual overlay dedicated to that Steam Link application. So you'll be able to connect it directly to your headset, see that actual Steam Deck or whatever computer Steam Link program you're using, and have a big window or whatever you want. Now, there's obviously one more big feature that SteamVR 2.0 has added, and that is the new keyboard system, which I still think needs a lot more work. They finally added dual hand typing support, which means you can actually have two lasers at once. But there's still a lot of issues with the keyboard. It's kind of slow. Sometimes inputs are missed. And while it does actually use any Steam keyboard what do they call it, themes that you have, either from Steam Deck or the Point Shop, still, I think it's too flat. That's my biggest actually nitpick about the Steam keyboard is it's just a flat window. I would like to see keyboards start getting more 3D. I mean, that should be the easiest task in my opinion. But yeah, it's there. It still needs work in my opinion, but it's there. Now, I also want to reiterate, because I know people are waiting for me to talk about this, and there's been this idea that a lot of stuff that we've data mined for Deckard might be just in general used for all headsets connected to SteamVR. And now that SteamVR 2.0 is released and we've seen all the things breaking and the things working with the platform, there are still many things that are reserved for this Deckard HMD in the actual backend files that are still not being used. So I'm pretty confident to say that there will be obviously a new Valve headset. Valve's not a company that would update something as like kind of small user base as SteamVR to this huge refresh unless they were doing something that was more important to their long-term plans. And I think hardware is probably something that would make them want to unify and kind of get this SteamVR 2.0 from beta into public within exactly a month, which is a pretty crazy low amount of time for at least Valve time things. So there's definitely stuff still going on. Valve even said in their first beta post when the SteamVR 2.0 came out that they would have even more features to talk about as the coming weeks and months go on. So it's just the beginning. If anyone's having some teething pains with 2.0, yeah, it's rough. It's rough, especially for Linux users, from what I understand, which I did read a post, surprisingly, that apparently the biggest kind of crash or IPC compositor issue is present related based on the base Linux Steam client, but it does not happen with the Steam Deck version of Steam client. We'll see where this goes. If any big updates come out with SteamVR 2.0, obviously I'll love to make videos about it. But for now, I just wanted to talk about this because there is this huge unification of focus of 2D applications. And I do actually believe in this. I do use a VR headset this past couple of weeks, which obviously I'm working on a review for, which hits the level of quality, especially for playing 2D applications and games, very well in a VR headset, because you get some benefits for sure doing that. And if some of those features like real-time reflections actually work out the way we hope, just like it does on Apple, but on other systems, I think it's very immersive. I think it's great. I think it's really valuable because eventually these 2D applications will become 3D over time and have some cool volumetrics with it. I really do think that is the future of where things are going, because your monitor can do one thing very well, but it can only do that one thing. Whereas a VR headset can take that monitor and make it do many things very well as the hardware gets there. So yeah, that's it. Bye.